The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Special Agent Danielle Carter parked her unmarked car near a row of neatly trimmed lawns. She had been tracking counterfeit money circulating in the area and was here to gather more information. Dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, she blended into the surroundings. With her clipboard in hand, she walked confidently toward a house on the corner where reports indicated suspicious activity. Danielle wasn't worried. She'd done this kind of work countless times before. As an experienced FBI agent, she knew how to handle herself in tricky situations. But today, something felt different. Before she could knock on the door or even step onto the porch, a voice cut through the calm evening air like a knife. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The tone was sharp, accusatory, and dripping with hostility. Turning around, Danielle saw Officer Karen Hargrove marching toward her. Karen was known in the community for her abrasive attitude and quick temper, but Danielle didn't know that yet. All she saw was a uniformed officer approaching her with an expression that made it clear she wasn't there to ask polite questions. "I'm investigating a case," Danielle replied calmly, holding up her clipboard as if to explain her presence. "I'm with the FBI." But Karen didn't seem interested in explanations. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into a sneer. "FBI? You don't look like any FBI agent I've ever seen." It was said mockingly, almost dismissively. Danielle's heart sank. She'd heard comments like this before, subtle jabs disguised as curiosity or doubt. Still, she kept her cool. This wasn't the first time someone questioned her authority because of her skin color or her gender, but it never got easier. Karen stepped closer, invading Danielle's personal space. "Let me see some ID," she demanded, her voice rising louder than necessary. Danielle reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge and identification card. She held them up clearly, making sure Karen could read every detail. "Here you go," Danielle said firmly, maintaining her composure despite the growing tension. But instead of examining the credentials carefully, Karen barely glanced at them. "This could be fake," she snapped, waving off Danielle's proof as if it meant nothing. "You're coming with me." Danielle couldn't believe what was happening. Was this woman seriously ignoring her badge? Refusing to back down, Danielle tried again. "Officer, I'm on official duty. If you have concerns, call my supervisor. My name is Special Agent Danielle Carter, and I'm assigned to this case." Karen laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that sent chills down Danielle's spine. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Queen of England," she shot back sarcastically. Then, without warning, Karen grabbed Danielle's arm roughly and spun her around. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the otherwise peaceful street. Danielle's mind raced. How could this be happening? She hadn't broken any laws. She was just doing her job. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal in broad daylight. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, curious about the commotion. A few people even stepped outside, watching in stunned silence as Karen shoved Danielle toward a patrol car parked nearby. As Danielle sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, she took a deep breath. She knew panic wouldn't help her now. Instead, she focused on staying calm and thinking strategically. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Karen Hargrove had no idea who she was messing with. Danielle sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her hands still cuffed behind her. The air inside was stifling, and the metallic smell of the handcuffs seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors whispering among themselves, some filming the scene on their phones. Danielle could hear fragments of their conversations. What's going on? Is she really an FBI agent? Why is Karen arresting her? Karen stood near the hood of the car, talking animatedly into her radio. Her voice carried an edge of triumph, as if she'd just caught a notorious criminal instead of detaining a federal agent. Every now and then, she glanced at Danielle through the window, her expression smug and self-assured. It was clear Karen believed she had complete control over the situation. But Danielle wasn't about to let this escalate further without a fight. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Officer Hargrove," she called out, "you're making a serious mistake. I need to contact my supervisor immediately." Karen turned toward the car, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, here we go again," she muttered under her breath before walking over to the open window. "Look," she said, pointing a finger at Danielle, "you can call whoever you want after we get you processed. Until then, you're staying right where you are." Danielle clenched her jaw, but didn't raise her voice. Losing her temper wouldn't help. She needed to stay composed. "You don't understand," she said evenly. "This isn't just some local case. I'm a federal agent. Detaining me like this could have serious consequences for both of us." Karen scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "Yeah, sure. And I'm supposed to take your word for it. Sorry, sweetheart, but I've heard every excuse in the book." She gave Danielle a condescending smile before stepping away, clearly dismissing her entirely. The minutes dragged on. Danielle watched as more people joined the growing crowd outside. Some looked sympathetic, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others seemed entertained, treating the scene like a live drama unfolding in their neighborhood. Every flash of a camera felt like another blow to Danielle's dignity, but she refused to let herself spiral into despair. Instead, she focused on finding a way out of this mess. When 2 additional officers arrived on the scene, Danielle hoped they might bring a fresh perspective. Surely, someone would listen to reason. But her hopes were quickly dashed. The new arrivals barely glanced at her credentials before nodding along with Karen's version of events. One of them even joked, "Looks like we've got ourselves a wannabe cop tonight," earning a chuckle from Karen. The comment stung, but Danielle bit back her frustration. She reminded herself that these moments of injustice were precisely why she had chosen to work in law enforcement, to make a difference, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Ironically, now she found herself in need of protection from the very system she served. As the officers prepared to transport her to the station, Danielle decided to try one last time. "I'm telling you the truth," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If you check my ID thoroughly, you'll see I'm Special Agent Danielle Carter. My supervisor is Deputy Director Marcus Reed. Call him. He'll confirm everything." For a split second, there was hesitation, a flicker of doubt in one officer's eyes. But Karen quickly stepped in. "Enough," she barked. "We're not falling for any sob stories. Let's move." And so, Danielle was loaded into the patrol car once again. As they drove away, she stared out the window at the faces watching her leave. Some looked angry, others confused. A few simply shook their heads in disappointment. Despite the humiliation coursing through her veins, Danielle felt something else beginning to stir: determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever happened next, she vowed to make sure Karen regretted ever doubting her. The ride to the police station felt endless. Danielle sat silently in the back of the patrol car, her mind racing as she replayed the events of the past hour. The injustice burned inside her, but she refused to let anger cloud her judgment. She had been trained for situations like this, moments when patience and strategy mattered more than emotion. Still, it was hard not to feel defeated as they pulled into the station's parking lot and led her inside. Inside the precinct, chaos reigned. Phones rang incessantly, officers shouted across desks, and printers hummed with activity. No one paid much attention to Danielle as she was escorted to a small holding area near the booking desk. Karen handed off responsibility to another officer, muttering something about wasting time on frauds. Danielle ignored the jab, focusing instead on what came next. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing the kind of behavior that could happen all too easily if left unchecked. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Danielle was allowed a brief moment to request a phone call, a right guaranteed even to those accused of wrongdoing. "I need to speak to my supervisor," she said firmly, looking directly at the officer processing her paperwork. He hesitated, glancing nervously between Danielle and Karen, who stood nearby glaring daggers. "You're wasting your breath," Karen interjected dismissively. But Danielle didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and commanding. "Officer, I'm a federal agent. If you refuse me this call, you'll be violating federal law. Do you really want to explain that to your superiors?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with authority. After a tense pause, the officer nodded reluctantly and handed over a landline phone. Danielle dialed quickly, her fingers trembling slightly despite her outward calm. On the third ring, Deputy Director Marcus Reed answered. "Marcus, it's Danielle," she began, cutting straight to the point. "I've been detained by local law enforcement under false pretenses. They're refusing to acknowledge my credentials or release me." Her tone remained professional, but there was no mistaking the urgency beneath her words. On the other end of the line, Marcus listened intently. When Danielle finished explaining, his voice turned sharp. "Stay calm. We'll handle this immediately." Within minutes, he sprang into action, contacting both the local police chief and higher-ups within the FBI. News spread fast. Danielle's case wasn't just a personal issue. It was now a matter of institutional integrity. Meanwhile, outside the station, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Videos of Danielle's arrest were circulating online, capturing every humiliating moment. Social media erupted with outrage. Commenters expressed disbelief at how a decorated FBI agent could be treated so disrespectfully. Hashtags like #JusticeForDanielle trended nationwide, drawing attention from journalists, activists, and everyday citizens alike. News outlets picked up the story, airing clips of the confrontation alongside interviews with legal experts and civil rights advocates. Danielle's face became synonymous with resilience, her composed demeanor during such blatant discrimination earning widespread admiration. Even late-night talk show hosts weighed in, using humor to highlight the absurdity of the situation, while amplifying calls for accountability. Back at the station, Danielle could sense the tide turning. Officers who had initially dismissed her claims grew quieter, their body language shifting as whispers of Marcus's intervention reached their ears. One young officer approached her tentatively, his expression apologetic. "Ma'am, we've been told to wait until further instructions come down," he said softly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the hours ticked by, Danielle allowed herself a small measure of hope. What had begun as a routine assignment had spiraled into something far bigger than she'd anticipated. While the ordeal was far from over, she knew one thing for certain: Karen Hargrove, and anyone else complicit in this injustice, would soon learn exactly who they were dealing with, and Danielle intended to make sure they never forgot it. By the time Deputy Director Marcus Reed's name started echoing through the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Officers who had once dismissed Danielle as a nuisance were now exchanging uneasy glances. Word spread quickly. The FBI wasn't going to let this slide. Phones rang off the hook at the station, with calls coming in from federal authorities, local government officials, and even national media outlets demanding answers. The pressure was mounting, and it showed on every face in the room. Karen, however, remained defiant, at least outwardly. She paced near the booking desk, muttering under her breath about overreactions and people making mountains out of molehills. But her bravado couldn't mask the tension creeping into her posture. Every time a senior officer approached her to ask questions, she grew more agitated, her voice rising slightly higher than necessary. It was clear she hadn't expected this situation to spiral so far out of control. Meanwhile, Danielle sat quietly in the holding area, observing everything around her. Though still cuffed, she carried herself with quiet confidence, refusing to let the circumstances diminish her dignity. A few officers passed by, avoiding eye contact, but clearly uncomfortable. One of them, a rookie, paused briefly, his expression a mix of guilt and curiosity. Danielle gave him a small nod, not out of forgiveness, but as a reminder that actions have consequences. He quickly looked away, shuffling off to join the growing crowd gathering near the chief's office. Outside the station, the public outcry continued to swell. Protesters began arriving, holding signs that read "Respect Authority" and "End Racial Profiling." Some chanted Danielle's name, turning her into a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice. Local community leaders delivered impassioned speeches, calling for accountability and reform. Cameras flashed as reporters interviewed bystanders, many of whom expressed disbelief that such blatant discrimination could occur in broad daylight and involve someone as highly regarded as an FBI agent. Inside, Danielle finally caught a break. An older detective, visibly shaken by the unfolding scandal, approached her with a set of keys. "Agent Carter," he said gruffly, unlocking her handcuffs, "I'm sorry for how you've been treated. We're working to resolve this as quickly as possible." His apology felt genuine, though it came too late to erase the damage done. Danielle rubbed her wrists gently, nodding in acknowledgement but saying nothing. She knew apologies wouldn't fix the deeper issues at play here. As the hours passed, internal affairs investigators arrived to begin questioning everyone involved. Karen was called into a private room for what promised to be a long and grueling interview. Her usual swagger faltered as she realized the weight of scrutiny bearing down on her. Outside the interrogation room, whispers circulated about past complaints filed against her, allegations of racial profiling, verbal abuse, and misuse of authority. These incidents, previously brushed aside or buried, were now being dug up and examined in excruciating detail. Danielle, finally free to leave, chose to stay just a little longer. She wanted to see the wheels of justice turn, even if only in small increments. As she prepared to step outside, she paused to address the gathered crowd. Standing tall despite the exhaustion etched on her face, she spoke directly to the cameras and the people watching. "What happened today isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady and powerful. "It's about the countless others who face similar treatment every single day. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern. And until we confront that pattern head-on, none of us can truly claim to live in a fair society." Her words resonated deeply, earning cheers from the crowd and nods of agreement from those listening online. For Danielle, this moment wasn't just about vindication. It was about shining a light on a broken system and demanding change. As she walked away from the station, flanked by colleagues and supporters, she knew the fight was far from over. But one thing was certain: Karen Hargrove's world was about to crumble, and Danielle would be there to witness every step of it. The investigation into Karen Hargrove's actions moved with a speed that surprised even Danielle. Internal affairs investigators worked tirelessly, combing through years of records, complaints, and testimonies. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture, not just of Karen's behavior that day, but of a pattern of misconduct stretching back over a decade. The more they dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger problem. Karen had always prided herself on being tough on crime, but her tough exterior masked something darker. Past complaints revealed a history of targeting people based on their race or ethnicity. A black teenager accused her of verbal harassment during a traffic stop. A Latina mother claimed Karen wrongfully detained her at a grocery store after accusing her of shoplifting without evidence. Even coworkers described her as abrasive and uncooperative, often dismissing concerns about her behavior as jealousy or oversensitivity. But what truly sealed Karen's fate were the witnesses who came forward after Danielle's arrest went viral. One man recounted how Karen had pulled him over for no apparent reason, demanding to search his car despite having no probable cause. Another woman shared a story eerily similar to Danielle's. She'd been handcuffed and detained while trying to report a burglary, only to have Karen accuse her of lying about her identity. These accounts, once buried or ignored, now gained credibility in the court of public opinion. As the days passed, Karen's defiance began to crack under the weight of scrutiny. She gave a rambling statement to Internal Affairs, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. "I was just doing my job," she repeated over and over, though her voice lacked conviction. When pressed about why she hadn't properly verified Danielle's credentials, Karen stumbled, offering weak excuses like, "I didn't think it looked official," or "You can't trust everyone walking around with a badge." Her answers only deepened suspicions about her judgment and her biases. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protesters gathered daily outside the police station, holding signs that read "Accountability now" and "No more excuses." Local news stations aired segments featuring interviews with victims of Karen's past actions, each one adding fuel to the fire. Social media buzzed with calls for justice, and petitions demanding her termination garnered tens of thousands of signatures. For the first time in her career, Karen found herself not as the enforcer of rules, but as the subject of widespread condemnation. Her colleagues distanced themselves, fearing association with her tarnished reputation. Some even spoke out publicly, condemning her actions and calling for systemic reforms within the department. "What happened to Agent Carter is unacceptable," said one veteran officer during a press conference. "It's a wake-up call for all of us to do better." Finally, the axe fell. After weeks of investigation, Internal Affairs delivered their verdict. Karen Hargrove was fired from the force, effective immediately. The decision cited multiple violations of protocol, abuse of power, and a blatant disregard for federal authority. Criminal charges soon followed, including false imprisonment and misconduct, though Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she'd simply made a mistake. Few were willing to listen. Her attempts to downplay her actions only fueled further criticism. For Danielle, watching Karen's downfall was bittersweet. While she felt vindicated, she couldn't help but reflect on the countless others who might not have received the same level of support or justice. This case had exposed cracks in the system, but repairing them would take far more than firing one bad officer. As she stood before reporters once again, Danielle emphasized that accountability was just the first step. "We need real change," she said firmly. "Not just apologies, but action. Because until we address the root causes of these problems, stories like mine will keep happening." And so, as Karen retreated from public view, her life in ruins, Danielle prepared for the next chapter of her journey. A mission not just to heal from her own experience, but to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. Danielle knew that her ordeal wasn't just about her. It was a reflection of something much bigger. The injustice she faced could have happened to anyone, and she was determined to make sure it didn't happen again. Instead of retreating into herself or letting bitterness consume her, Danielle decided to channel her pain into purpose. She became an advocate for change, using her platform to shine a light on the systemic issues that had allowed someone like Karen Hargrove to operate unchecked for so long. Her first step was partnering with civil rights organizations. These groups had been fighting for years to address racial profiling, police misconduct, and inequality in law enforcement. Danielle brought her firsthand experience to the table, sharing not only her story, but also insights from her career as an FBI agent. Together, they pushed for reforms at both local and national levels. Their demands included mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, stricter accountability measures, and independent oversight boards to review complaints against law enforcement. But Danielle didn't stop there. She realized that real change often starts with education, and representation mattered more than ever. Inspired by the young faces she saw during protests and rallies, Danielle launched a mentorship program aimed at encouraging Black women and other underrepresented groups to pursue careers in law enforcement and government agencies. The program offered scholarships, internships, and workshops designed to equip participants with the skills and confidence needed to succeed in fields where they were often overlooked. One of the highlights of this initiative was Danielle's monthly Courageous Conversations series. Held online and in person, these events brought together community members, activists, and law enforcement leaders to discuss difficult topics openly. Danielle moderated each session with grace and wisdom, creating a safe space for dialogue. Attendees left feeling empowered and hopeful, knowing their voices were being heard by people who could affect change. Danielle also testified before Congress, delivering a powerful speech that resonated across the nation. Standing at the podium, she spoke not just as a victim of discrimination, but as a professional committed to protecting others. Her testimony highlighted the urgent need for reform, citing statistics and personal stories to drive home her points. She challenged lawmakers to move beyond empty promises and take concrete action. By the time she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, not because her words were easy to hear, but because they were impossible to ignore. As her advocacy work gained momentum, Danielle began receiving invitations to speak at universities, conferences, and community events. Each appearance reinforced her message. Resilience in the face of adversity is powerful, but systemic change requires collective effort. Audiences were captivated by her authenticity and passion, leaving inspired to join the fight for justice. Through it all, Danielle remained grounded. She understood that true progress wouldn't come overnight, and setbacks were inevitable. But she refused to let cynicism creep in. Every letter of support she received, every young woman who told her she wanted to follow in her footsteps, reminded Danielle why she kept going. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and accountability. By turning her pain into purpose, Danielle transformed what could have been a devastating chapter in her life into a catalyst for meaningful change. And while the road ahead was long, she walked it with unwavering determination, knowing that every small victory brought them closer to a better future. Months after Danielle's arrest, the investigation into Karen Hargrove and the broader issues within the police department reached its climax. The findings were damning, not only for Karen but also for the system that had enabled her behavior for years. Internal Affairs released a detailed report outlining multiple violations of protocol, discriminatory practices, and a culture of complacency that allowed misconduct to flourish unchecked. It was a wake-up call not just for the local police force, but for departments across the country. Karen's disciplinary hearing became a media spectacle, with reporters camped outside the courthouse and live updates streaming on every major news network. Inside, the room buzzed with tension as prosecutors laid out their case against her. Witness after witness recounted incidents of racial profiling, abuse of power, and outright hostility toward marginalized communities. One by one, they painted a picture of an officer who saw her badge not as a symbol of service, but as a tool for control. Danielle herself took the stand, her presence commanding silence in the courtroom. She recounted the events of that fateful day in calm, measured tones, emphasizing how Karen's actions weren't just disrespectful, they undermined public trust in law enforcement. When asked if she held any personal animosity toward Karen, Danielle paused before responding. "This isn't about hatred or revenge," she said firmly. "It's about accountability. If we don't hold people accountable for their actions, we can't expect change." The verdict came swiftly. Karen was found guilty of false imprisonment, misconduct, and violating federal protocols. In addition to losing her job permanently, she faced hefty fines and community service hours working with organizations focused on racial equity. For many, the punishment felt like justice served. But Danielle knew better than anyone that no amount of legal consequences could erase the harm caused, both to her and countless others who had suffered silently under similar circumstances. In response to the scandal, the police department announced sweeping reforms. Mandatory implicit bias training became standard for all officers, along with stricter guidelines for verifying credentials during stops. Body cameras were issued to every member of the force, ensuring transparency in interactions with the public. Perhaps most significantly, an independent oversight board was established to review complaints against officers, giving citizens a stronger voice in holding law enforcement accountable. These changes didn't happen overnight, and Danielle played a key role in pushing them forward. She worked closely with city officials and advocacy groups to draft policies that prioritized fairness and accountability. Her input carried weight because it came from someone who had experienced the flaws of the system firsthand, yet remained committed to improving it. Public reaction to the reforms was overwhelmingly positive. Community members praised Danielle for her leadership, crediting her with sparking a long-overdue conversation about systemic racism in policing. Even skeptics admitted that her approach, focused on solutions rather than blame, was refreshing and effective. As trust between law enforcement and the community began to rebuild, Danielle's name became synonymous with progress. Still, Danielle understood that true change required constant vigilance. Reforms on paper meant nothing without consistent enforcement and follow-through. She continued to monitor developments closely, attending town hall meetings and speaking out whenever necessary to ensure promises translated into action. Her persistence inspired others to stay engaged, reminding everyone that justice wasn't a destination, it was an ongoing process. Though the scars of her ordeal remained, Danielle refused to let bitterness define her. Instead, she chose hope and resilience, proving that even in the face of injustice, one person's courage could ignite a movement. And while Karen's downfall marked the end of one chapter, Danielle's journey was far from over. Every reform passed, every young mind inspired, and every life touched by her advocacy brought her closer to the world she envisioned, one built on fairness, respect, and equality. Danielle's story didn't end with Karen's downfall or the reforms that followed. In fact, it was only the beginning of a legacy that would inspire generations to come. As time passed, her name became synonymous with resilience, justice, and the power of standing up against systemic wrongs. Her experience sparked conversations that transcended borders, reminding people everywhere that change is possible when courage meets determination. Books were written about Danielle's ordeal, chronicling not just the arrest, but also her journey from victim to advocate. One biography, titled Standing Tall, The Danielle Carter Story, became a bestseller, praised for its honest portrayal of both the pain and triumph she endured. Readers connected deeply with her humanity, her moments of doubt, her quiet strength, and her unwavering belief in doing what was right. Schools began including excerpts from the book in their curriculums, teaching students about the importance of speaking out against injustice. Documentaries soon followed, capturing Danielle's story on film. Directors interviewed everyone involved, from witnesses at the scene of her arrest to lawmakers who helped push through reforms. Archival footage of protests, news reports, and Danielle's impassioned speeches brought the story to life, making it impossible for viewers to look away. The documentaries aired on major networks and streaming platforms, reaching millions worldwide. For many, seeing Danielle's face on screen served as a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. They often walk among us, quietly fighting battles we may never fully understand. Hollywood took notice too. A feature film based on Danielle's life entered production, with acclaimed actors signing on to portray her and the key figures in her story. The movie didn't shy away from the raw emotions of her experience, the humiliation of being handcuffed, the frustration of being doubted, and the joy of finally being vindicated. But it also highlighted her transformation into an advocate, showing how one person's voice could ripple outward and create waves of change. When the film premiered, audiences erupted into applause, moved by the message of hope and perseverance. Beyond the headlines and accolades, Danielle remained steadfast in her mission. She traveled across the country, speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences. Her talks weren't just about her own experience. They were calls to action. She challenged listeners to examine their own biases, to speak up when they saw injustice, and to support policies that promoted fairness. Young women, especially those from underrepresented communities, flocked to her events, eager to learn from someone who had broken barriers and refused to back down. The mentorship program Danielle launched grew exponentially, expanding to multiple cities and inspiring similar initiatives nationwide. Graduates of the program went on to pursue careers in law enforcement, government, and civil rights advocacy, carrying forward the torch Danielle had lit. Many credited her with giving them the confidence to dream bigger and aim higher, proving that representation matters more than ever. Years later, when asked how she wanted to be remembered, Danielle smiled thoughtfully. "I don't want people to focus on what happened to me," she said. "I want them to remember what I did afterward. If my story inspires even one person to stand up for what's right, then it was worth every moment." And stand up they did. From classrooms to courtrooms, from city halls to Capitol Hill, Danielle's influence continued to shape the world long after the headlines faded. Her legacy wasn't just one of survival. It was a testament to the transformative power of grace, grit, and unwavering faith in the possibility of a better tomorrow.